To switch from bio. Oh. Wait, don't you just declare? Dude, actually, I spent like 2 hours, like 4 hours, like such a play yesterday. Really? You can't find it? I thought you just like might the. I just like reach out and just.
All right, I think I'm gonna get started, guys.
I can't find the button. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hackschool. This is session 4. Let me hide that. Session 4. We're gonna be talking about navigation and also doing a little bit of JavaScript today. Yeah. So where are we on the curriculum? Well, we're in week 5 right now, where we're doing navigation. We have 2 more workshops to go until the project showcase. But before that, if you haven't RSVP'd, please do it. But if you did it before the event, you don't have to do it. But you just this lets us keep a head count of who came, and like it's good for whenever we review and look back on the quarter. Okay, so this is another reminder that this workshop is just another step in helping you build your own personal website. So we'll be learning about navigation today. So hopefully you guys will be able to incorporate that in your website too. Are we good? Is my voice good on the back? You guys hear me clearly? Cool. Yeah, so another reminder for week 8, we have a competition where it's not like super competitive, but essentially that personal website you guys work on during the quarter, if you submit it, you can get prizes based on how good it is. Okay. Right. So Hack Kitchen. Is there anyone here making an announcement with Hack Kitchen?
And then just another announcement.
Cool. Bruin Odyssey, new announcement. The 3rd puzzle is out, not the 2nd one. So it's a bit of a should have updated the slide. But yeah, please go check it out. Okay, so here is another light reminder on code along. So I don't recommend coding along during this workshop because I'll be coding a lot and doing a lot in the demo, and I'm afraid that if you look down at your computer to copy what I just did, you'll miss it when I switch over to the next screen, and you'll miss a lot of things, and it'll be hard to catch up. So what I recommend is to sort of sit back and just watch and absorb what I'm doing. And the code that I'll be writing, as well as the slides, can all be found online during and after this workshop. So yeah, and here are the said links to the slides and the demo. Cool. I'll give a moment for that. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off last week. So for those who weren't here last week, or even if you were, Jakob introduced how components and props worked in React, and using that, he was able to make this little garden section of the website. And what does that actually look like? Well, if I go to the website, we have what we coded in the first couple of weeks, and then there's the main point is this section over here. It's this section of plants, and each of these plants look very similar, but they're sort of have different information on them. And what does it look like in code? Well, in code we have sort of, it's good enough. Can make it bigger. Okay, in code it looks like this. And if we go to the component, there's a components folder, if we remember. And in this garden.js, we were able to sort of make a plant component, and then in every in the section where we want our plant to be, we sort of have called our plant component, and we passed in the data that we wanted to be displayed on the website. So yeah, so that's how it worked, and this is sort of how it looked like in the website and in the code. But then now we start to really, after looking at our website again, we started to notice a problem. And that's that everything is on one page. Okay, so so far we've sort of been just like slapping everything into the home page, into like the root page, and it's not really what websites should be like. if you remember, like all the website you guys have been on, like sort of there's like nice links to go to different pages. There's nice ways to navigate around different pages. And that's what navigation is all about. So website navigation is a collection of user interface components that helps visitors find content and features on a site. So for example, these would be like a nav bar at the top where you can click and go to different pages, or links to go to different pages, or buttons that take you to different sections of a page, something like that. So these are things that you've all seen before. And some things that I just want to highlight is that there's different types of navigation. Evidently, where's my pointer? Ah, nice. Okay, so there's for example, in the Hack website, this is called the nav bar. There's like a bar at the top where you can click and navigate between different pages. There's menus, there's submenus, there's icons, there's all that. Okay, so that's what we want for our website. So that's really our goal today, is to make some sort of nav bar like the one here that can sort of, instead of having everything on one page, we can click on these links on the nav bar and it could take us to different pages. Okay, so that's the end goal and the main thing that we're going to aim towards today. Okay, so yeah, so we can make this, but first we're going to need to sort of learn some concepts that let us implement this navigation, but also we need to sort of tidy up our own website right now and sort of make everything nicer and cleaner so that we can implement this navigation functionality. Don't worry about it, we're going to get into it. First, we're going to need to learn some JavaScript because we're going to need it later. So I'm going to first start off by talking about objects. And objects in JavaScript, they're called JavaScript objects. If you come from like other languages like C++ or Python, I think it's important to note that JavaScript objects are different from class instantiation, which are in the other languages. Those are called objects. They're different. So objects in JavaScript are different from other languages. And what do they look like? Well, this is, let's say that I wanted to store my friend's information. So right now we know how to make a variable in JavaScript, right? We have const name equals to Joe Bruin. And so this name is sort of the variable, and we can make all these variables for my friend's information, okay? And now, let's say I want to make another set of related data. So let's say I want to make another set of information for another friend. I could probably name the variable like name2 or age2 and have all the information here. And this starts to get really messy, especially if there's more friends, I want to make more information. And I think what I'm trying to get at here is we want some way to group all this information together so it's nice to just handle just that little group and be able to move things around easily there. So this is what JavaScript objects are good at doing. And that is storing data in the form of key value pairs. What I mean by that is this on the left is the key, and the thing on the right is the value. So I'm going to break this down. So to start off, if you see in JavaScript these curly braces, usually they mean JavaScript objects. Okay, so if you see this and then you see sort of this funny syntax, that means this is a JavaScript object. And we can break this down. So the thing on the left, we call them properties. So these are the properties of the object. So name is a property of this person object, and age is a property of this person object. Okay, and these properties all have a corresponding value. Okay, so these are the values, and Joe Bruin is the value for the name property. 18 is a value for the age property, and so on. Okay, and you can, after declaring this object, you can access the value for these properties. So for example, if I do person.name, that corresponds to the name property. So if I go back, person.name, and the value will be the value that corresponds to the property. So in this case, it's Joe Bruin. Okay. There's another sort of different notation called a bracket notation, not going to go over it. It's not too important. I think dot notation is fine for what we have right now, but these are just up here for you to reference. Okay, so we can also modify an object's property. So if I change my declared person name to Josie Bruin instead, then we've sort of changed their name. So now person.name, if I console.log, if you haven't heard of console.log, it's basically just means print. It's like a print statement if you have done other language. It's like sort of outputs whatever that variable value is. Okay, so yeah, and now we've changed the name property to Josie Bruin. Okay, same for the bracket notation. And cool thing is you can also put functions as values of a property. So for example, here, all people sleep. So we have a function here. This is a function. If you haven't seen this syntax, it's called an arrow function. And it's like just like a funny syntax. It's a nice syntax and it means it's a function with no name. And yeah, so this is the parentheses and where the arguments will be. And then this is the arrow to what the function actually does. So in this function, all it does is it prints ZZZ. Yeah, and so this function is assigned to the sleep property. And now we can call person.sleep with the parentheses as if we're calling a function, and it calls the function, and it does whatever the function does. In this case, it prints ZZZ. And whenever we put a function inside of an object, we call that a object method. Cool. Yeah. So any questions so far about objects? Cool. What am I doing on time? Okay. Next is arrays. I want a quick show of hands. Is everyone here familiar with arrays? Or no, not familiar? Okay, cool. I can go over arrays. So let's look at an example of when objects fail to get the job done. So imagine I have a large collection of test scores and I want to store them in some sort of data structure somehow. And the only thing that we've learned is objects. So I would try to store them in an object. And the way I would do that is probably something like this, like test score 1, and then the first test score 2, the second test score, and so on and so forth. But then this is kind of redundant. It's got a lot of like repeated information. Like I don't need to know that this is test score 1 because I know that it is already a collection of test scores. So arrays are how we solve the problem. So array is basically a collection of values stored sequentially. And usually whatever values this array is storing, they are related in some way. And we really like arrays, and arrays are useful because it's really easy to perform operations on them. It's really easy to store large amounts of data. It's really easy to access information within them. I'll show you what that means. So this is how you create arrays in JavaScript. And the sort of thing that you can identify them by is these square brackets. So whenever you see these square brackets, means it's an array. So for example, I can declare an array of numbers and I assign it to a number variable, and I sort of have 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm storing 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the array, and these values are separated by a comma. Okay, so here, for example, in this example, I'm storing a bunch of different ways to greet people. And this is one of them is hi, hello, and yo. Okay. Yeah. And you can get more complex, and you can get really complicated if you bring arrays into objects. So here is an example of storing an array of objects. And then within this object, you have another array property value. So it can get pretty complicated, but yeah, this is just giving you an idea of what arrays are. It's basically storing information sequentially. Okay, and weird computer sciences are weird, so they basically it's called indexing, and it means numbering, identifying each element of an array. So if I have an array with values 1, 2, 3, and 5, 4, and 5. So I can sort of index them starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the first item of an array is the 0th index. The second item of an array is the first index. The third item of an array is the second index, and so on and so forth. And I can access elements in an array by using its index. So for example, I have an array called numbers. And if I want its first element, I will use the 0th index. So I can do numbers and then these square brackets 0. And then now I can get the value within the first element, which is 1. So if I print it, it prints 1, which corresponds to this value. And similarly for the third element, if I do numbers index 2, which means the third element, then it's prints 3 because it's the third element. Okay. Whew, that was a lot. Any questions? Yeah, I'm sorry I'm speeding through this because I think we have a lot to get through today. So yeah, I'll go a little fast. And then here are some basic array operations that you can do in JavaScript. I mentioned that in JavaScript, or just in general, arrays are really useful because you can perform operations on them. These are some of what they are. So you can do array.length. Let's say array is any array that you declared. Array.length gets the number of elements in an array. Array.push, and if you pass in some value in the parentheses, it adds that item into the end of the array. Sort of pushes it at the end. All right, I guess this way. And then pop removes the last item from an array. So it removes the last item. So it's like popping it off. And then index of gets the index of an element. So yeah, these are something that is good to know. You definitely don't need to memorize these, but just know that these are some of the useful things that you can do with arrays. Okay, so any questions? Okay. Yeah, so I'm gonna move on now to something new. So let's say that we have a task. Okay, we have a problem given to us. I have an array of numbers. I'll call it old array, and it has 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and the task for me is to create a new array that is every item in this old array, but it's multiplied by 5. So, e.g., I want 5, 10, 15, and 20 instead of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so how would you go about doing this? Well, if you're pretty familiar with how to work with arrays, you might sort of go ahead and do something like this. You might create a new array that's empty for now, and then you can do something called loop over an array using a for loop. Won't go too into it, but if you know what it is, good for you. You can loop over the array. It means to go through every single item in an array. I think there's a wrong syntax in here. This should be of, but that's okay. And for every item in an array, you can say, okay, I want the new item, and I want it to be the old item multiplied by 5. And then I want to push this new item into the new array. Okay, so this gives us our desired result. Okay, 5, 10, 15, and 20. But this is kind of like a lot of code just for something so simple. And like so much thing, you have to declare a new array, you have to do a for loop. It's really complicated, and just very difficult to look at. So it's really just the inconvenient way. Okay, and there is actually a better way to do this, specifically for when you want to create a new array from an old array, and these values are somehow related. Okay, so I'm gonna take this code, I'm gonna put it aside for now, and I'm gonna show you the better way, and then I'm gonna explain it. This is the better way. Okay, so this is, if you notice, we're doing something called .map. So we have an array .map, same array as old, but .map, and what we're passing in is a function. This is a function, and this function takes in an old item as argument, and it returns this old item multiplied by 5. So yeah, so what does it do? So this is called array.map, and every array, you know how I mentioned that arrays have operations you can do on them? Well, .map is one of them, just as how .push, .length, is one of them. .map is one of them, and it's basically .map is a function or a method, if you would. It takes a function and it performs some code on each element, and then it returns a new array with the updated elements. So if you can imagine, this .map it calls this function on every item in this array. Okay, so for the first iteration, it calls this function on 1. So old item in the first iteration is 1. Okay, and it returns old item multiplied by 5. 1 times 5 is 5. So when it returns it, it sort of puts it into the new array, which is why we have 5 here. And then the second iteration, it does 2. 2 multiplied by 5 is 10. And then whatever it returns, it puts it into the new array, which is 10, which is why we see a 10 here. Okay, and so on and so forth. So it's basically very similar to what we just did with the for loop, but it's sort of a new and cleaner way of doing it. Okay, and these in the slides here are more examples that I'm not going to go over, but are more for you to go back and look if you want to have a breakdown of like a more detailed breakdown of how .map works. And there's also resources online you can look at, so I highly recommend those as well. Yeah, so you might get the question like, why array.map when we could just use that for loop? Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, it's a really short syntax and very clean code. And in React specifically, it gives us a lot of benefits, and which is why array.map is very, very commonly used in React. So just wanted to let you guys get very familiar with this first, and we're also going to be seeing examples of it later. Okay, so here I'm going to hop into a demo to sort of use what we just learned. Okay, so if we go back to our garden component, so just a refresher, a garden component takes all of these information like Lenny, Fern, Monferro, and Monstera, and it sort of makes a plant component that's wrapped by this grid item, and it sort of displays it onto the screen. Okay, and here we see a opportunity to make our code better, because if you look here, it's again a lot of repeated code. You've got a lot of grids, and these grids are the same thing. And then you've got these plants. It's very similar, plant name, but except the only difference is that the information you pass in is different. And using what we just learned, we can actually make this better. So I'm going to first comment all of this out. Okay. And I'm going to make a array. Okay, I'm going to call this plant info or plant information. So this is going to be an array. What is going to be an array? Well, I want to store all of these plants' information. So the most easiest way to do that is I'm going to make an object, because I want to group the information together. One of the object's properties will be the plant's name. So I can do name. And then the first plant is Lenny. So I can do this. And then its age is 4. And then its species is Fern. And its image is Fern. Okay. And I can sort of go in and copy and paste every single one of these, but that's kind of a lot of work to do it for everyone. So I'm going to go into our GitHub repo, where that's linked in the slides. And I've already written all of this before, so copied it out beforehand. So it sort of looks like this. And if I copy paste this here. Right, so almost as if we sped up time and wrote all this down ourselves. Okay, so right now we just have an array. It does nothing yet. So if we go back to our website, actually, Joe Bruin's garden is empty. It's very sad at the bottom over here. So we want to somehow be able to turn this object, this array of objects, into an array of all of these things, okay? A grid and a plant name, which sounds like a job for map that we just learned, okay? So how are we gonna do this? Well, first, we're going to do array.map, okay? So I can do plant information info, and I can do map. And I want to use map to create this thing, but for every single item in the array. So what does map do? If we remember, map takes in a function, and the function argument has one. It's called, and it's one item in the array. So I can just say plant, okay? And this function, for example, and we need to return something. So we need to, what should we return, okay? Well, I want every single one of these objects to be a single one of these. So I can actually use this. I can do, I can return, for example, grid. And then I need to close the grid. And then in grid, it's the same deal as every single grid item. So we can do x equals 4, just as we do in previously. And then here, I want it inside a grid item. I want to have a plant component here. Okay. So the question now is, what should we pass in as props? So for name, I shouldn't do a hard-coded value like Lenny. I want to do the plant's name, each of these plants' name. So remember how to access an object's value, you use the dot notation. So I do plant.name. And then for age, similarly, I do plant.age. Remember, this plant refers to this plant over here. I think there's some sort of syntax error I have somewhere. Let me just do this real quick. Okay, cool. And then for species, I have plant.species. Okay, to avoid this, I'm going to wrap this all into a new line. Species, plant.species. I typed species twice. Okay. And image, plant.image. Okay. So yeah, this all looks good to me, except it looks a little ugly. So I'm going to sort of put this all into its proper lines like this. Okay. I'm gonna quit Discord now because it's annoying me. Okay. Cool. And if we save and we go back to our garden, we see, voila. Okay, we have our things here. Our garden is there as if it was before, except we have this sort of cleaner syntax over here that we have. Okay, it's very short, very easy to read. All we're doing is taking this plant array and we are making an object with each and one of them. Okay, I'm sorry, making a plant component. And this has an added benefit. So if, let's say, you wanted to add more plants into your garden, you don't have to sort of copy and paste one of these, replace all the information with the plant. All you need to do is, in the top of the file, make a new object, and then what is its name, you type in the information here. It's very easy to maintain now. So that's another reason why people really like this sort of map implementation. Okay, so that's the component, right? So that's how we can do this stuff. Okay, so moving on. I think compared to last week, there was a lot of people that weren't here last week when we did components and props. So we're actually going to do a little bit of mini recap, just to recap, components, props, maybe a little bit of CSS for those who missed it, just as a refresher, but also as a way to get better at them. And we're going to do this review by making this. Okay, this is an experience section of a personal website. I think all personal websites have something like this. Okay, so we're gonna make Joe Bruin's experience section. And yeah, let's go ahead and make it. So remember how we make something like this? Well, we want to make a component. Okay, I'm going to go into my file here, and in the components folder, I want to make a new component. So the way, if you remember to do that, is you make a new file. And for example, I want to call it experience list.js. Okay. And same old, you do import React from React. And then the way you make the component, if you remember, is you make a function with the same name as a file. And this function returns something, we don't know what yet. But then at the end, we do export default experience list. Okay. Great. And then how do we use this experience list? Well, in app.js, same as how we did it with Garden, we can import, because we exported the experience list, we can now import it somewhere else in the website. We can do import experience list from /component/experience list. VS Code is nice, it just automatically did the import for me. Okay, so how do we add it to our website then? At the bottom, remember how we added the use the experience list? So I can just do the same thing. I can make a div, which is just a box. And this box, let's give it the class name section2. And then in this box, we have our experience list. Okay, nice. So in our website, should have an error because our experience list right now returns nothing. But let's say I had something inside, it should display at the very bottom I wonder if you can see it, but yeah, at the very bottom, there's hi here. Okay, so nice. So we've sort of done all the scaffolding. Let's try to actually make this experience list. So first of all, I want to have it be a box. And in this box, I'm going to say, let's have an H2 or an H1, both works, but H2, we're gonna call this experience. If we refer to the slides, this is sort of what it looks like. There's a title at the top that says experience. Okay, so we want a title that says experience. Okay, what next? Well, what comes after is a bunch of these sort of experience listings, right? For example, UCLA ACM, badminton club. And these are sort of, they look the same, they have the same purpose, but they just have different information. Okay, so that sounds very familiar because we're gonna make a component for that. Okay, so if we do, so I'm gonna make a component, I'm gonna call this experience.js. Okay, we made another component, so same drill. When we make a component, import React from React. And then you create a function with the experience that's called an experience, and then it returns something, and then you export default experience. Okay, and after you exported it, you can import it from experience list. So I can do import experience from /experience, and then I can have I can sort of display something here and then call it like that. Okay, so that's same old, same drill. Okay, now in experience, let's try to code this thing. We know that experience should take some props. Okay, what should it take? Well, what kind of information is stored here? Well, it has sort of the name of our experience, the start date and the end date. It has our title or position, and then a description. So I can do name, and then start date, end date, title, description. And these are the props that it takes. Okay. And so correspondingly in our experience, let's do that later. Let's make our experience thing. So we can do div. We will make a div. We want a box to contain everything. And I can first have, so we can sort of split this section into a header. This is the heading that contains all the sort of important information, and then there's a description. Okay, so I can make a div, and this is for the heading, and then there's a p tag here for the description, and in here I'm gonna do description. And in the heading, so that's our description done. In the heading, I'm going to, so what is in the heading? There is a title and then two sort of paragraph tags. So for example, I can do h2 and I can do the name. And then I want to group the start date, the end date, and the title together. So I sort of make another div, typo div, and then in this div, I have a p tag, and this is sort of start date dash end date. So I'm going to do start dash end date, okay? And that's sort of mimicking this start date dash end date sort of format here, and then another p tag for title. Okay, nice. So that's that. That's experience. So if we go to experience list, we need to pass in these props, right? The name, the start date, and whatnot. But before we do that, we just learned a really good way to do something like this with a lot of different experiences, and that's with array.map, right? So to do that, we should first create an array. So I'm gonna create an array. I'm gonna call it experiences. And in each experience is very similar to our garden. It has a name. Let's say our first one was, I think, UCLA ACM. We have a start date. It was November 1996. And end date, which is now. Our title, which is owner, sorry. And a description. Do this description, some description, okay? And I could type all of this out, but to save us some time, I'm going to go into the GitHub repository again, and I'm going to go to experiencelist.js and copy and paste all this that I wrote down beforehand, okay? And this is the same thing. We're just making up this data. Okay, so we have all this data. It looks like this. It's called experiences. It has what we just defined. So an object, a bunch of objects that have name, start, end, title, description, and the corresponding data. Okay, so now let's sort of map all these objects into an experience component. So how do we do that? We can do experiences. So the name of the array is called experiences, and I can map. What do I map this to? Well, map takes a function as an argument, right? Experience, and then I can do this and return, and whatever returns is what is in the new array. So I can do experience, and this is exactly what we want for our experience component. So we can call our experience component, except that we can pass in props now, and we can pass in experience dot name. For start date, we can do start experience dot start. End is experience dot end. Title is experience dot title, and description is experience dot description. Okay, so it's very, very, very ugly. So I am going to not fix it because I'm lazy, but actually I will. There is, I think it looks like this. Let me just do this. Looks like this. Oh. Okay, so this is the component. And then yeah, so I made this look a little nicer. Wait a second. Is this charging? Hang on. Yeah, check. Yeah, I need to be charging. Otherwise, my laptop will die in like 30 minutes. Okay. Yeah, so we have mapped our data to these experience components and we have displayed our experience list. So what does it look like now? Hopefully it looks good. Okay, it's there, but it looks bad. Okay, so all our data is here, but now we just need to sort of make everything look like that. So I think this is a job for CSS. So in our demo, we're gonna try to style this. So we have sort of every item looks like this, but we want to style it. So this is a little bit of CSS review. So first things first is I want to align the text, right? Because we want the description to be left aligned, so we apply the left align property. We want the text align on the right we want the start date, end date, and the title to be right aligned, to be on the right side, so we applied the text align right property. And then I also did a margin 0 to get rid of all the spacing so it can be closer together. And then now, if you notice, everything here is sort of almost in the right place, except for this main title and this section. We sort of want these two to be in the same row, but then at opposite ends of the page. Okay, so this is actually a job for Flexbox, if you remember week 2. So we can apply a display flex direction row to this box, and they sort of become on the same row now, which is good. Problem now though is that they're stuck together, and this calls for the justify content property to make everything space between. So space between maximizes the space between the items in your flex box, which is why it pushes everything to the ends. Okay, so this almost looks right, except for this final property here called, except for like if you notice, if you draw a line, horizontal line between the two items, they're not aligned. One is on top of the other. So this is actually something that the align items property can fix if we sort of align everything in the center of that baseline. Okay, so yeah, so let's do that. I'm going to, in experience.js, I'm going to create a experience.css file, and it's going to have some class names. It needs to have class names to style, so I'm going to give some class names. I'm going to give this one a class name called container. It's the container for the entire component. And this div, if you remember, is for the heading, is for that header part. So I'm going to call this class name heading. And the title is okay. This div is also okay. We also want to style these two p tags, so I'm going to give them both the same class name called subtitle. And yeah, I think that's all we have for now. Oh, I can also do just, I also need a class name for the description. So this is, we're gonna basically do exactly what we just did just now in the slides. So for the container, let's start with the description first. So right now our website looks like this. So if I do, for example, I can hide this, so it's better. If I do the description class and I do text align left, it aligned everything. It should have at least. Oh yeah, okay. The reason why it didn't do anything was because I needed to import the CSS file. Rookie mistake, but yeah, you need to import the CSS file for it to be applied into your component. Okay. And yeah, so if I go back to the page, you see that it left aligned everything. It left aligned the text. Okay. Now for the subtitle, I can do a similar thing. I can align the text onto the right. And it aligned everything on the right, except that, there's like some weird spacing. It's spaced too far apart from each other. So I want to just do a margin 0 to get rid of the margins that they have. And sure enough, they're closer together now. Okay. The last one is the flex box. So if we do the flex box, we can do heading. I want to give it the display flex property. And I also want to do flex direction row. Okay. So this sort of, that was not right. Heading, that's the class. That should be right. Oh, it is right. So if you notice, like they're all in the same row now because they're in the flex box. So but they're now stuck together. We don't want that. So I'm going to in experience.css, I'm going to do justify content space between. And this should push them all towards the end like that. And then finally I do align content. Align items, not align content. Align items center so that everything is sort of centered. And that looks really good. Except, these two items and all these items are sort of stuck too closely for my liking. So I am going to apply a styling on the entire container itself for the entire experience item. And I'm going to give it some padding at the bottom. Basically just say move. At the bottom, I want more space for myself. So I'm gonna, let's say 20 pixels. Sounds good. And it sort of moved. There's like a little space here now, so it's nicer. Okay. One final thing, if you go back to the original review, there's like this space. That's nice. It sort of pushes everything in the middle, so it's easier to see. And the way you would need to style that is you would need to go to experience list.js, where the container for all of the experience items is. And I want to do, let's just do inline styles. I would do margin auto. And let's say I give it a width of, have it take up, for example, 60% of the container. Okay. And that, yeah, so that sort of shrinks the width of the entire container. Okay, so good. We've sort of coded this experience component. And if you go back to our app.js, all we did was sort of call it in our app.js. Very simple, but then one component was all it took to have all that displayed on our screen. Okay, so we're almost there. We're almost there. If we look at the rest of the page, it's sort of not really nice. We have all this content and then suddenly 2 components. What we really want is for everything to be sort of sectioned off into their own components, and all app.js needs to worry about is which component to use. And so I'm going to be moving all of this into its own component. So if I go to the page itself, I can see that, the experience and the garden are pretty much grouped by themselves together. Like the garden is its own component, the experience is its own component. And if I go scroll up, I can see that, fun facts about me, my favorite foods ranked, my camera roll are all, related to Joe Bruin, and like fun facts. So I'm going to put these into like an about me page. Okay. And to do that, I will need an about me component. And then this is sort of like an intro or like a landing page. Whenever you first load the page, you want to see this really simple introduction of Joe Bruin. Okay, so this is going to be its own component, and then this is going to be its own component too. So let's do that real quick. I'm gonna make new components. So again, more component making. You guys gonna get really good at this by the end of it, but I'm gonna create an about me .js. And same deal, import React from React. I'm going to make a function. I'm going to call it about me. And it's going to return something. What is it going to return? Well, it's going to return this thing. It's going to return all the way from fun facts about me to my camera roll at the bottom here. Okay. So yeah, so I got rid of it. I copied it and got rid of it. So if we go back to our code, you should see that it's gone. The section is gone. Okay. We want to now put it into our about me component. How are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to make a React fragment and then slot everything in here. Okay. And I'm going to also fix the tab spacing. Okay, nice. So this is the about me component. We now need to export default about me. And then back over here in app.js, we can import about me from components about me. Okay. And great. So there's that. There's going to be errors most likely. And that's because b-ball is not defined and all of these are not defined. Why? Well, in our section, we needed to use images. And if you remember, to use images, you need to import them. So we imported them in app.js, but we never imported them in about me. So we should import them now here. So instead of /access, there should be /assets. And this should work with no problem. So we can import them with no problem. So all we do at the end here is about me. And there we go. It's back on our page. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that really quickly for the home page too. I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna copy it, and I'm gonna delete it. And then I'm gonna make a new component. Gonna call this home. It's gonna be our home page, sort of. You'll understand why later, but same deal. Import React from React. Function home. And then it's going to return all this over here. Going to fix the spacing too. Okay. And then finally export default home. Okay. And then hope it's really familiar with you guys now. I can do import home from components home. And then we get an error because we use an image. So we need to move this import statement for that image from app.js into home so that the home component can use it. And that's /assets now. And then now we can use the home component. And then there we go. We're back. We're back. Okay. Last thing is if you look, so here's all the components that we're going to make. We've made all our components. They're still displayed onto one page, but they're sort of now all sectioned off into their own components. And it's really nice for us to use them in the future now. One last thing is if you look at the code for garden and experience list, if you go to experience list, there's a div. And then outside of the experience list, there's a div, but with class name section. So what we have is a div wrapping a div, which is pretty redundant because it's the only thing that's wrapping. So what we can actually do is get rid of the class name here. We move the class name into here, into the inner div, and then we can now get rid of the outer div. Okay, and this is the exact same thing. This should result in the exact same code. Right, good. And then we can do the same thing for garden. So if I get rid of this class name and copy it, and then I go to experience list, garden.js over here, I can then put the class name into the div over here. So yeah, there is that. Okay. And finally, then I remove the div over here because it's doesn't do anything for our code anymore. So now I can sort of put these all into one single sequence. And again, no change in our code, but now everything's nicer. Our app.js is simply these 4 components, and they are simply being displayed one by one over here. Yeah. Okay, so that's it for the recap demo. It's basically the entire workshop, but I think this is like important, especially for React, where you need making components is sort of like, and like doing props and stuff is sort of like the bread and butter. React have to get used to doing it. So I think it was good too. And also, oh, why did I skip like 10 slides? Okay. Yeah, so now we're ready for navigation. But how are we gonna do that? Okay, so that's the main thing. So we're gonna do that using React Router DOM. Okay, and what it is, it's an open source package that implements navigation in React. And this package, we can add it to our project using npm. So we don't have this project by default in our app, in a React app. We need to install it as a separate thing. But it's like super common. Like everyone who wants to use navigation and wants to implement it in React is probably going to use this package or library, if you like to think of it. So I think we've talked enough about npm to warrant that we should probably explain what it is. So if you remember, at the beginning of this series, in our first workshop, we were like, create a React app using npm npx create React app. And then you do npm install and then npm start to run your app. And that's all using this thing called npm. So what is it? It stands for Node Package Manager. And it's basically an online registry for many, many JavaScript packages. Think of it as like a library somewhere on the internet or a catalog of all of these JavaScript packages and it's open source, which means that other people have written it. So, you could write a npm package, and if it gets approved, it's on the npm registry. So yeah, and turns out React is one of them. So there's a React library written by Facebook, and they got it on the npm registry, and that's why you can do npx create React app, npm install, npm start to download all those packages, including React, and then run your app in React. Okay, so React Router DOM or React Router is just one of those packages. Okay, so the way you add it to your project is just to do npm install React Router DOM. So I'm going to do that right now. Enlarge the terminal, Control C. I'm going to do npm install React Router DOM. And while we're waiting for that, I'm going to go over here and sort of explain how we use React Router. So what is React Router? Well, it's a package, and it sort of gives us, in a very React-like way, it gives us components to use. Okay, so 4 of these really core components are the router component, the routes component, the route component, and the link component. Okay. I think there's a lot of details here that I think takes like too long to explain, or even I don't know, but what I do know is how to use them. So the way you would use them in your app is for your router component, you need to wrap your entire app.js or your entire app in the router component. It's sort of, you just need to do that in order for the package to work. And then in the routes component, you need to wrap a bunch of route components. And this route component is where like the key is. So you can do, and this route component takes a couple of props. One of them is path. So for example, /some_path is a path, and this path refers to the URL path. So for example, if I do I do localhost 3000/some path. That is the path. This is what I'm referring to by path /some path. I don't have any like weird bookmarks or anything, right? Okay, cool. And then, so another path, for example, I would want to do garden. So you can imagine that if I do /garden, it would take me to the garden page, hopefully. Okay, so yeah, And if I go back to the slides, route takes another prop, and that is the element prop. And it's simply the React component that you want React Router to display when your website is on that path. So for example, in the About Me path, we wanted to display the About Me component. And that's sort of why I had to move everything into their own separate components, is because we needed to use React Router DOM to interface with it. Okay, and the final one is link. So link component is exactly as it says. It's a link that you can take you to different paths, and you can use it as a substitute for the A tag. A is the link tag, the default link tag for HTML, to visit routes that you just created. So very, very intuitive. Again, it's link, and then there's a to prop. So I want this to link to / some page. Basically, I want to go to some page. And in this case, it'd be I want to go to the garden, I want to go to the About Me page. Okay, very, very intuitive. Very easy to use once you actually set it up. And after you set it up, you don't really need to worry about it. Yeah, so let's see. Do we have any questions so far? I think I should have stopped for questions earlier, but any questions about React Router? No? Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and do what we just said we would do, which is implement the navigation. So I see here that the npm ran successfully, so I can do npm start to run our app. While it's doing that, I can do something. So first of all, I need to import the components that React Router gives us. So the way this would work is import, and I want to import the router component, the route component, the route component, the link component. So the way it works is I want to import, and I'm going to sort of hand wave this, but I'm going to do browser router, which is a type of router, as router. And then another thing I'm going to put is the route component and the link component. And I'm going to do this all from the package we just downloaded, which is React Router DOM. Okay, that's the name of the React Router package. And the way you would get this, again, as a reminder, is npm install React Router DOM. Okay. Yeah. So again, as I just said, you need to wrap everything in the router component. So I'm gonna do this and copy and paste everything in here. And I'm gonna sort of move this out of here for now. You'll see why in a bit. And then, right, so we've done step 1. We wrapped our entire app in the router component. Okay. Step 2 is to use the routes component to make a bunch of route components. Okay, so the way we do that again is routes. It's the same thing. We're just using components that other people have defined, but we're using them the same way as we would as if we defined our own component. So we do routes and then route. And if we remember, routes, I'm gonna comment these out for now. Okay. Nice. So our app should have nothing but the header. Nice. So if we remember from the slides, a route takes a couple of props. One is the path, so what path we want it to be. Let's do the home page first. So the path for that would actually be / no path, okay, because that's the home page, the page that first displays when you go to localhost. And then the element will be the home element, okay? And we do the same thing, but for different paths. So for About Me, I would want to display the About Me component. And then for the path garden, I want to display the garden component, except that I also want to pass in props. So for owner, I do Joe Bruin. And then for experience, I do experience list. And there we go. So if we go back to our page, now all that's displaying is the home component. And that's what we want because we're sort of in this slash path, the root path. So if I do that, it's the same thing. Okay. Now if I go to garden, it takes us to the garden component because we've told React Router to display the garden component whenever we're on this path, whenever our website is on this path. Similarly, we can do experience, same thing, and then same thing for about me. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so let's now go back to the home page. Let's say you are a user and you want to somehow get to other places of the page. If you remember from the beginning of the workshop, I had this sort of header at the beginning of all the links that take you to the website, to different parts of the website. If I go back, it should look like it's like something like this. So this is what we want. So we have all this functionality for the different pages set up. We just need this header thing that has the links to the different pages. Okay, so let's do that first. And if you remember, it sort of looks like a link. And I want to do to. It takes a property to. And for example, the slash path is home. And then the same thing for the others. I want this link. I'm going to call it about me, about, and it has to take us to the about me page, and the path that corresponds to the about me page is about me. So I have to do about me. And then similar for all of the other pages. So I do garden. I should use the garden path. And then for experience, I should use the experience path. Okay. And I'm going to wrap this all in a title, in a div, into a box. And I'm going to give it a class name because we're going to style it later. And we're going to call it header links, I believe. I forgot what this was. I think header links. Okay. And yeah, so if we go back to our page, it's got these links. And this is kind of big. So I think I want these in p tags actually. So you can actually wrap links. I'm going to wrap the link within a p tag, which should make it smaller. No, it doesn't. It just makes a new line. Okay, we're going to have to style this later. But yeah, so now, also, I guess to sort of separate all of these, I can add like this little bar between the links. So like so. And it sort of separates everything. Don't worry about how bad it looks right now. But now if I click on these links, so if I click on about link, it takes us to the about me page. Great, what we want. If I click on the garden link, it takes us to the garden page. You can notice the URL up here changing. So experience home, okay? So that's exactly what we want. That's exactly what we want. And now the final step is to sort of style this. And actually, the way to style this is very, very similar to Flexbox and what we just did for the experience page. So I'm not going to go over that. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to go over into the repository. I'm going to go to app.css, and I'm going to sort of just copy all the CSS. There's not a lot in here, a lot of extra things. I'm just going to, it's just easier and it saves time. But yeah, it was called header title. So I'm going to call this header title. And this should, fingers crossed, be styled exactly as we want it to be. Wonderful. Except that this text is black for some reason. I'm going to change that. Navigation color white. Hopefully that fixes the problem. Okay, it does. So nice, this is exactly what we want. So if we go and click different parts of the link, it takes us to different parts of the page. And this is sort of our nav bar. It could look better, but it looks okay, and it has sort of the functionality that we expect it to have. So yeah. And we've reached our goal. So before we almost end off, are there any questions about the demo, about anything we covered this workshop? Okay. If you do have the time, you feel free to stay here and work on your projects, work on your personal websites. You can work on just adding general content or adding navigation, up to you. We have mentors here to help you. If not, then you please fill out the feedback form. Really appreciate the feedback. I know it went a little fast today, but really appreciate the feedback that you give us, because we really read that. We read that every week and we try to make it better. So yeah, so thanks for coming. Good luck on midterms. And if you do have time between midterms, please come to our next session next week, same time, same place, where we're going to talk about state management in React. That's it. Thank you.